Still works. I'm sure I've mentioned this before. I mentioned now that I was going to tape this, that I don't know if you've ever noticed, it was pointed out to me many, many years ago that with every new technology, you use the old technology to describe it. So for example, you know that light bulbs are measured as far as their strength, their power, what's called foot candles, like how many feet that candle would burn. You'd see the distance, and cars are rated in horsepower. So yeah, so you use the old technology to describe the new technology. So I still say tape, even though it's not taping anything. Anyways, Tov. A couple things. First, I just sent a couple minutes ago, I sent a link on our group, and I keep forgetting to do this. I have had I don't really use it very much until recently, and I'll explain that. I have a YouTube channel. You're welcome to subscribe to it if you want to. Basically, the only things I put up, that you'll have things from the past and speeches I've given and rallies I've spoken at, whatever it might be, other significant events, but that you'll find there now all the latest, let's say couple months of Navi classes, Kuzari classes, and there's an organization, I'm not exactly sure who I'm doing this for, but there's an organization that every week I make a 2 or 3 minute short Dvar Torah on the Parsha, and they send it to the United States, to a whole bunch of places. So I figured I might as well put that on the YouTube channel. So it's going to be there every week. So you can feel free to access that anytime, to read it anytime, to listen to anytime, and have fun with it. The other thing is, just as a historical note, tonight we entered Seger number 3. Once again, an unnecessary action, but whatever. But it's time to get into our own little world tonight of Navi. We are going to, when we start, which will be in a minute, we're going to be again Melachim Bet, Kings 2, Perek Yud Zion, number 17, and Pasuk Lamed Bet, 32. Just give a bit of a reminder of a background, what we're holding before we move on. I also sent out earlier today, I sent out the little bit of this evening, the plan, what it is for tonight. So, Kacha. The Northern Kingdom has been pretty much removed from the north, been transferred to other countries. Other countries have had people brought in. They have been, Sancheriv has brought them into the land of Israel, into the Northern Kingdom. Turns out that things weren't going so well for these transplants. Now we're going to call all of those people that came from other countries Kutim, English Cuthean, Kuthians, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a minute. But these Kutim, things start going bad for them. Evidently, there was an expectation that they should have some modicum of respect for the land of Israel and for the law of Hashem, and they didn't. And an immediate form of punishment, Hashem sends arayot, he sends with an aleph, he sends lions and attacks them, and many of the people convert. They're called the Gerei Arayot. They were people who converted out of fear of the lions, which is also going to have a ramification we'll talk about momentarily. And then the king is told, like, hey, wait a minute, you transferred all these people there, but it seems that because they're not keeping the law of God, they say the law of the God of the land, they don't necessarily Hashem per se, that we may need to do something about that. He decides to send a Kohen, who was considered the group, also the teachers, but there's one or two, I'm not going to bother talking about now, to teach the Kutim what exactly is the basic rules and regulations of serving God. Where we left off was they understood God, and that's not the right word, but they recognized Hashem. And at the same time, they not only recognized their idols, but they also built more of them. And they gave a list of names and places of where they were building them. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick it up now in Pasuk Lamed Bet, number 32, again in chapter 17. Vayiyu yireim et Hashem. These Kutim, I wanted to back up a second and say that when we get to, let's see where it is. Pasuk, well, Soon. I'll tell you at some point why we care, why we're talking so much about the kutim that existed at that time. They feared God, feared Hashem, these kutim, meaning in addition to their idols and to their lowercase g gods. They took a page out of Jewish history, and what they did was they kind of cherry picked some people from among their own non-Jewish members, and decided they're going to anoint them, so to speak, with the idea that they're going to become their priests for all these different high places of their own altars. Okay, so they appointed all these people to be, they just told us again, I know it's been a week, 2 weeks, I guess, since we last got together. So just a reminder that the last pasuk or two before this, they're telling us all the names of these idols that they built and where they built them. So it says, besides those idols, they also feared Hashem. And they made some people the priests for those idols. Lamed Gimel 33. Now, this is going to sound repetitive. Et Hashem ayu yireim. Wait a minute, he just told me that. Lamed Bet, Lamed Bet and Lamed Gimel isn't a misprint. Lamed Bet starts by Ayu yireim et Hashem, they also feared God. Lamed Gimel says, et Hashem ayu yireim. It's not like Yirmiyahu thought that we had a short memory. There's obviously a reason why there is an additional repetition here. Ve'et Elohehem hayu ovdim. And they also worshipped or served their idols, their gods. Kamishpat hagoyim asher higlu otam misham. They stayed, sorry to use this expression, lahavdil, they stayed with their Mesorah. Whatever their Mesorah was in their former country, whatever their Mesorah was, whatever their tradition was in the way they served their idols, etc., they brought that with their tarbut, their culture, to the land of Israel. You'll also notice there's two words in here. It says in this pasuk in Lamed Gimel, it says, "Et Hashem hayu yireim." They feared God. Ve'et Elohehem hayu ovdim, and they worshipped or served their idols. So it's important to note that on this, that they recognized that God was God, that Hashem had some power, but they still didn't worship Hashem. They still didn't necessarily follow Hashem's rules, because they were still too busy worshiping their own gods. So what's this business of repeating this idea that they are fearing Hashem? So let's take a quick look here. And now we'll come to a little bit of a conclusion why it was so important to talk about the kutim. Et Hashem hayu yireim. Again, for those of you who have not been with us very long, just remember, almost always when I post a slide, unless I tell you differently, it's going to be from the Dad Sofrim commentary on Navi, a modern day commentary who's, Alav Shalom, who's absolutely fantastic. Okay, we'll start with the second line. Chazar pam nosefet al hadavar. He goes back and repeats once again, shekvar nemar alav ifneza. That's already been said, which was that these people, the kutim, also feared God. Ha'uvda shahayu yireim et Hashem yichola hayta lehatot be'atid. Here's the crux of why saying this. If that pasuk stood alone, pasuk lamed bet, it says they feared God, it may have sent a bad message for future generations and caused them to make a mistake. Lomar shehem b'nei Yisrael amitim shetau, that they're actually really Jews who made mistakes, and their conversion was good, and that they should be accepted as Jews. They just made some mistakes. Okay, therefore, mudgash she'en lilmod davar miyiratam. We cannot learn from the fact that it says that they yirei Hashem, that they feared God. Ha'ikar hayta etzlam avodat ha'elilim. The main point in their lives was the worship of their gods. Again, I point out he doesn't. I'm actually surprised he didn't. That it says Yireim et Hashem and Ovdim b'mishpat hagoyim. B'meshach hazman hechelu lirot et atzmam kechelek mibnei Yisrael. As time went by, they saw themselves as part of Am Yisrael. The Gam Yisrael nechshavu kegerim, and also the Jews saw them as converts. Now, yes, they were to a certain degree considered converts. They were called gerei arayot. Again, the converts who came to Judaism because out of fear of the animals, of the lions. And in a certain way, we do have a tradition that where the certain areas, the kutim were actually more stringent in certain areas of halacha than the Jews themselves. That didn't make them full-fledged Jews. What this commentary is telling us is the reason, the repetition, at least a reason, repetition in such short order that the the Kutim were Yirei Hashem. Well, we shouldn't be fooled. Now, if you remember, it shouldn't be fooled that they're like true Jews. We should always keep that in mind that they're not.
Slicha, whose commentary was that?
The Dad Sofrim. Dad Sofrim.
That.
Yes. I think I'd sent out the cover sheet once. He's Rab Chaim Dov Rabinovich, the American, was. I didn't realize until many years ago that he also was a grandfather-in-law or something of someone I know in Chicago. So he didn't die that many years ago, but he wrote on most of Tanakh, a very, very wonderful commentary. And unfortunately, unless it's changed in the last year or so, still out of print. So wherever I do find copies, I snatch them up, whether it's a book sale or someone's giving it away. Anyways, so again, it's to let us know that they're fake Jews as opposed to fake news. They're fake Jews. Now, I have mentioned thousands of times that one of the reasons that we learn Navi throughout that we have learned Navi for hundreds and hundreds of, actually thousands of years now, is because the word of the Navi is in perpetuity. It's always to teach us something. And I think that there's something else that we need to get from this. Just like the Navi took pains, Yirmiyahu took pains to make sure that we didn't mistakenly identify these people as Jews because they were fake. We also have to be very, very careful within our own people to recognize what I call fake Jews. Fake Jews in that on the outside, they make themselves out to be religious and pious, and they're oh so special and so beloved before God. But inside, it's rotten in the state of Denmark. It's a very, very, look, I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone, chas v'shalom, but you know, I had a teacher who once told me the following thing. The man who gave me smicha, and he didn't usually make jokes, but this one, not a joke, but it's a nice line. There is a pasuk in the Torah when it came to Mitzorah, when it came to a leper, that part of the process of cleansing was uvgadav yihu frumim, that his clothing should be torn. And he used to say to us that unfortunately there's some Jews who live by that statement, which means uvgadav, in his clothes, yihu frumim. They should be frum. As long as you look frum, look religious, then that's all it counts. Unfortunately, we come across people like that in life. Now, on the flip side, which is this particular set of psukim, is telling us that we should be very careful that people who are considered kutim, who may be today's shomronim as well, they're not considered Jews, and we have to be mindful of that. And again, he tells us because this pasuk is mentioned twice for that reason, it's topic. Next pasuk Lamed Daled. Actually, before we Lamed Daled, I'm going to show you one more slide. It's short. Okay, remember we said that there were about 20 psukim that were an indictment of Am Yisrael. Then it took a detour and started talking about how they were, the non-Jews were then brought into the land of Israel, this whole story. Now it tells us something else. Kafi Anireh, Pasuk Lamed Daled, which we're about to read, Hu Sikum Inyan HaMityashvim Hazarim Ba'aretz, is a summary pasuk of the people who settled in the land of Israel, who were the foreigners. And after them, Choser HaNavi L'Ktav HaShama Al Aseret HaShvatim. And then Yirmiyahu goes back to once again restate some of the indictment against the northern kingdom. Etzem Ktivat Inyan HaMityashvim Kan, the main point of writing or the main action of writing this topic of the settlers of the non-Jewish, from the non-Jewish countries here. I mentioned this before, a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, that this whole topic that they mentioned of the non-Jews being brought and settled in the land of Israel is also partly considered, or could be considered, part of the indictment of Am Yisrael. Because it's bad enough they got thrown out of the country, but now look what happened. It enabled this vacuum to be filled with the people from the non-Jewish world. At Sofa Perek, it's possible, potentially possible, that from Pasuk Lamed to the end of our chapter, Medubar al Mityashvim Ela, that they're actually talking for the rest of this chapter about the foreign settlers in this country. There is and we're going to see this, there's a machloket between the Radak and Rashi, a dispute between commentaries whether or not the psukim after Lamed Aleph are talking about the Jews, are they talking about these foreigners, or maybe a mixture of both? We'll see as we read the next couple psukim. Okay, let's continue. Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Ad hayom hazeh hem osim kemishpatam harishonim. Till this very day, says Yirmiyahu, the author of Sefer Melachim, they continue following their original rules. Einam yirayim et Hashem. They weren't fearing God. Ve'einam osim kechukotam ukemishpatam. Nor were they doing their proper chukim and v'chatorah v'chamitzvah asher tziva Hashem et bnei Yaakov. And like the rules and regulations, the Torah and the mitzvot that Hashem had commanded the children of Yaakov, asher sam shemo b'Yisrael, that He placed His name in Israel. Okay, I'm not going to discuss this whole Bnei Yaakov and Yisrael and all that, even though that's very appropriate for this week's parasha, Vayechi. But it seems somewhat unclear. It sounds like he's talking about the Jews. But this commentary we just saw, the Dat Sofrim, seems to say maybe it's referring to the non-Jews. So let's take one look at Rashi. I think I put it on the slide. We'll see. Take a look. I did. Okay, good. Einam yirayim et Hashem. They, who's the they that were not fearing God? Yirah shelema kemishpat Yisrael. They were not fearing properly, like the laws of the Jews. Ve'af pi shenit gairu miyirat ha'arayot. Now Rashi, we see his position is that this pasuk refers to the non-Jews, that even though they converted because of fear of the lions, ein yiratam et Hashem yirah shlema. Their fear of Hashem was not properly, not complete kemishpat Yisrael, as is true of the Jews who have a true yirat Hashem. K'moshe mefaresh v'holech, as he continues and explains, she'enam oskim b'torah u'mitzvot she'tziva Hashem et bnei Yaakov, that they did not follow the Torah mitzvot as Hashem commanded the children of Yaakov. Okay. Ve'enam osim kechukotam u'chemishpatam shaya lehem lasot mishenit gairu, and they did not follow in the ways of Hashem and the Torah after they had converted. But rather just like the Kohen had taught them. Now here Rashi diverts from some of the other opinions. He says this Kohen was not actually originally from the Jewish people, but was someone from the Shomronim. Okay, but I'm not going to get into that, because you're going to see that Rashi's position is that this pasuk is miyuad, is geared towards or discussing those people who were not Jewish. The Radak and a couple others, Reb David Kimchi, commentary, Radak. If you know anybody, I actually work with someone whose last name is Kimchi, is the direct descendant of the Radak.
I do, Mayor Kimchi.
Yeah, okay, so I work with a woman whose name is Kimchi. Her husband's a direct descendant of the Radak. Anyways.
I never asked him.
Yeah. So there is, he says, no, that this refers to the Jews, and it's the beginning of an indictment. It's part of the indictment. And we're going to now see a very long, not very long, I'm exaggerating. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 or 6 psukim of a parenthetical statement from Yirmiyahu. We'll see that in a minute.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
If you're going to say this is a tangent, you can tell me to shut up.
I would never say shut up.
Okay, you can say we'll discuss it another time.
Okay, I'll buy.
If they say they brought back Kohanim, were those, assuming that the Kohanim were Jews, were they real Kohanim, or were they fake Kohanim made? Because all the Kohanim refused to deal with the Avodah Zorah of the 10 Shvatim we learned a long time ago.
Right. Very good question. Not off topic at all. If you go by the opinion that this was from the Jews, then it was a real Kohen. The only reason I can tell you that is that because we said a couple weeks ago that the job of the Kohanim was twofold. One was the Beit HaMikdash, and then especially in the Northern Kingdom when they didn't do anything with the Beit HaMikdash, the job of the Kohanim was to be teachers. So the king was taking just someone who naturally would have been one of the teachers, more than likely a real Kohen. Was he Tameh, Tahor, was he a good guy or not? That is left to multiple opinions. Very good question. Okay, one second. I want to decide here. Yeah, okay. The next slide I think I had is I actually discussed it already verbally, so I'm not going to get into it. So let's take a look now at the next pasuk. Pasuk Lamed Hey, number 35. Vayichot Hashem. Sorry?
I'm sorry. It would seem that Rashi is following a logical sequence, that the Kutim are not perfectly worshiping Hashem. They're, worshiping idols. And so, too, this next pasuk says, they're not perfect in their observance of mitzvot.
Correct. Which I think if you look among the other Mefarshim, I did a quick little survey. I didn't want to start quoting a million. Most seem to say that Lamed Daled deals with the Kutim and not the Jews. What is coming up now in Lamed Hey through Mem, not inclusive, is probably the Jews, but not necessarily the Jews. It's going to sound almost completely like the Jews. It's talking to the Jewish people, but there's still opinions that say that he's talking about the Jews, about the Kutim. Rashi says this next section is about the Jews, but let's see what happens. Vayichot Hashem itam brit. Hashem made with them a covenant. Who's the them? Let's just say the Jews now. Vayitzavem lemor, and he commanded them, saying, Lo tiru Elohim acherim. You should not fear foreign gods. Velo tishtachavu lahem. You're not allowed to bow down to them. Velo ta'avdun. You're not allowed to worship them. Velo tizbechu lahem. And you're not allowed to bring korbanot to them. Now, I'm going to read this pasuk and the next two. I'm going to point out something. Next pasuk. Ki im et Hashem asher ha'ala etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. Obviously, now we seem to see that this pasuk must be talking about the Jews, but rather you should serve Hashem who took you out of Mitzrayim bechoach gadol uvzora netuya. Oto tirau. He, Hashem, is the one you should fear. Velo tishtachavu velo tizbechu. Lamed vav. To him you should bow. To him you should bring korbanot. Next pasuk. V'tachukim et hamishpatim v'hatorah v'hamitzvah asher katav lachem. All these different, the chukim, the laws, the Torot, the mitzvot that Hashem wrote to you, tishmerun la'asot kol hayamim. You should keep them and do them all of your days. V'lo tira'u Elohim acherim. And you should not fear foreign gods. Next pasuk to read. V'abrit asher karati etchem lo tishkachu. The covenant I made with you, you should not forget. V'lo tiru Elohim acherim, and should not fear foreign gods. Anyone want to comment on that? Those 3 psukim or 4 psukim, something that's Choser al atzmo, repetitive.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Something related to that. I have the version I'm using is the Stone Edition. It has from 35 to 39 in parentheses. Any reason for that?
Oh, that's cool. Because it is really a parenthetical statement. We're going to see why in a little bit. Oh, that's cool. But what's strange about these psukim? Or repetitive, verbose? Look at the psukim, please. It actually stands out like right.
Lo tiru Elohim acherim.
Right. Lo tiru Elohim acherim. You should not fear foreign gods is mentioned 3 times in whatever 3 or 4 psukim. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do, let's talk about some other terminology that's used here. Hashem points out, the Navi points out in Pasuk Lamed Hey that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 verbs of what you're not allowed to do to these foreign gods. You shall not fear them. You can't bow down to them. You can't serve them. You can't bring sacrifices to them. I want to go back to when there's a discussion between Yaakov and Lavan. And there's a discussion about Rachel and Leah. And there's an expression that's used even in modern Hebrew that's taken from the parasha, which is Rachel bitcha haktana. Because Yaakov was dealing with a trickster, someone who was good at pulling an old switcheroo. When he said he wanted to marry Rachel, he could have just said Rachel, but he said Rachel bitcha, Rachel, your daughter. And he says haktana, the younger one. To be extremely precise, he can't say, well, I have another Rachel. I have a different daughter. He says Rachel bitcha haktana. So in modern Hebrew, the expression when you say, I want you to tell me this, Rachel bitcha haktana means every detail that I can't misunderstand something. So there's all this detail in that statement, Rachel bitcha haktana, and that's what this pasuk is also doing. in order that we should not think that the brit between Hashem and Am Yisrael was just don't have foreign. It says, Lo yelecha Elohim acherim al panai. You can't have foreign gods. Lo tishtachave lehem, lo ta'ovdeim, etc., etc. You can't bow down to them. You can't worship them. So Hashem lays out by Har Sinai, and now Yirmiyahu lays it out for us. Rachel bitcha ktana, all the things they cannot do. Why is he doing that now? Again, according to what seems to be the process here, he's returning. Yirmiyahu's returning to this indictment of Am Yisrael. He's getting one more dig in. Sorry for the use of the word, but that's pretty much what it sounds like to me. Into the northern kingdom, they did do this. They brought korbanot. They did all these things, and we know that. But what does it say we're supposed to do with Hashem? We're supposed to instead, in next pasuk 36, we're supposed to fear Hashem, right? Oto tira'u, and to Him we should bow, and to Him we should bring korbanot. I want to make a comment on one word, because the word that bothers me. Actually, I'm going to go back a step. If you had an education, a religious education from the time you were a child, this might hit home. For those of you who started learning about religious actions later in life, this may not hit home. In many cases, when a child is taught in school, and I've actually asked this to many parents, and it is true, when they're taught about washing their yadayim in the morning, netilat yadayim when they wake up, or also known as negelwasser, they're taught, as I was as a child, you're removing the ruach hatum'ah from the night. You're removing the evil spirits that rested on your fingers overnight. Ooh, that's pretty scary stuff. Evil spirits, scary. I remember as a kid, in sixth grade, I had one of those life-changing rebbes. But that's how he explained it also. And I remember being afraid that when the water was going to go down, I had to go on the sink, because if a single drop got on the counter, God forbid, someone could get tameh from it and get hurt from the evil spirits. And that's the fear that I know thousands of kids grew up with Netilat Yadayim, until many years later, I had a different teacher. Actually, it wasn't a teacher. It was just someone who told me, and something I was learning, that one of the reasons we wash our Yadayim in the morning is because we're trying, is a symbolic gesture to purify ourselves before we go before God for the day. Oh, that resonates. That's not fear. That's not telling me to be scared of God. It's telling me what? It's telling me to be in awe of Hashem, to be understanding that I'm about to start my day in front of the Melech Malchei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are so many things that we can impart to ourselves, to our students, to our children, to family, that can go one of two ways. It can cause you to have an unhealthy relationship with Hashem, and I'm going to talk about fear in a second, or to have a loving relationship with Hashem. The word Yirat Hashem, and I know I've spoken about this before, but I never remember which class it's been in, so I'm sorry for some of you who may have heard this. When you talk about Yirat Hashem, it can mean three possibilities. One, fear, because we are supposed to be in fear of God, right? I mean, if a person, I like to take it, it's not a good example, but using a human example, it's the 13th century, and you're brought before the king he's the despot, and he's the ruler, and he's the sole judge, jury, and executioner, literally. You're going to be in fear of the king if you're not doing the right thing. So one is Yirat Hashem, is fear. The other is awe. What does that mean? Awe. A-W-E. When you have stood at any time in your lives and just looked out at the magnificence of a sunset, mountains, throngs of hundreds of thousands of Jews in one place, whatever it might be, it's just like, wow, it's like unbelievable. Or you look up at the stars at night. This past week we had the confluence of two planets right near relatively right near each other, that happened in 500 years ago was the last time. I don't remember what the statement was. But you just look at that and you realize that it's a little insignificant dot, and yet Hashem still cares about you. That should give you a sense of awe. God is grand, Hashem is magisterial, and yet He still cares about me. That's awesome. That's what the word awesome means. By the way, the word awful historically meant like awe-inspiring. It didn't mean bad. Over the centuries, that's changed. The other is another one that is from the word lirot, to see. Now, whether this works with proper dikduk and nikud, I won't begin to tell you right now, but I'd like to think that Yirat Hashem has another connotation, that you see Hashem in everything, in your daily lives, whatever you experience, whatever you come across. When you say, oh, that's Yad Hashem, whether you got on the bus in the right time or whatever happened, your whatever, your check came, your bank transfer came from Bituach Leumi because of the Sega, whatever it is. Everything you see, the Yad Hashem, that's also a form of Yirat Hashem. And that in this pasuk in Lamed Vav, we're told the flip side of pasuk Lamed Hey. Don't do what it says in Lamed Hey. That's the Sur Merah. Ne'aseh Tov is pasuk Lamed Vav, what you're supposed to do. And part of that action of Oto Tira'u is the idea of being in awe, being in fear of Hashem, and then seeing Hashem in every aspect of your life, of your lives. So what's this business, though, going back to our original question, of Lo Tira'u, or Lo Tir'u Elohim Acherim, you shall not fear other gods. Okay. No, not that one. Okay. We have an expression, Pam Shlishit, Glida, right? So here it's different. Pam Shlishit, Niskru Milimela. So the Dad Sofrim points out what we just saw, what we noticed on our own, that this is the third time they're mentioning that you should not fear other gods. Hakavana kechol ha'inyan. The intention is, like this entire episode, she'af bizman shenir'eh yiyeh ki'ilu hufra habrit va'elilim sholtim ba'olam, lo tir'u mehem, ki en bahem mamash. What does that mean? Before I translate, let me remind you, how did this little parenthetical statement start? In the beginning of Pasuk Lamed Hey 35, Vayichrot Hashem itam brit. Hashem made with them, meaning with Bnei Yisrael, a covenant. Now you might think, he says, that there's certain times where the non-Jewish world seems to really be winning, and their gods, G-O-D, lowercase g, are in fact winning, and the brit has been exchanged for those other gods. Still, nevertheless, lo tiru mehem, don't fear them, ki ein behem mamash, because there's nothing whatsoever to them. That's why he says that it's repeated 3 times like that. Okay. If we take a look, yes.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Pardon me for interrupting.
Never to interrupt you.
These two psukim, these two viewpoints,
Mm-hmm.
in my mind, are a contradiction, and I don't know what to do with them.
Okay.
If it's talking about Am Yisrael, they're gone. They've been exiled.
Mm-hmm.
They're not there to
Right.
do this. If they're talking about the Kutim or whoever showed up, it almost looks like Hashem is accepting their conversion, that they're Jews.
Good. Okay, so I'll address that.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, good. So due to what you're conflicted with is borne out by the fact that the vast majority of the opinions is that these psukim are directed to the Jews and not to the Kutim. There is an opinion that there's still the Kutim, and still it is pretty clear, because Rashi himself changes this section. The first pasuk Lamed Daled says is the Kutim. Now he says Vayichot Hashem itam brit. Rashi says Kishenatan lem Torah b'Har Sinai. He didn't give the Kutim the Torah on Har Sinai. So then Rashi agrees with you. I'm sure you're happy to know that. But the fact is, you're right. The Jews are gone. So how come he's mentioning this now? This is the continuation, therefore, apparently, or the last bit of Yirmiyahu's indictment of Am Yisrael. Again, this chapter, which we spent a very long time on, because it is a turning point of Jewish history. Ain't seen nothing yet, by the way. That don't think that after those 20 psukim, okay, then the other people came and they said, okay, by the way, I just want to remind you, he says, before we close this chapter, even though it's not chapters of Jewish origin, I just want to remind you where we've been and where we come from, because this is going to lead us in a little bit to the next chapter when we start talking about the Mamlechet Yehuda. Okay? Pasuk Mem. Velo sham'u ki im kemishpatam harishom hemosim. Who? says they didn't listen, but rather they kept along their original ways. So again, it could be the Jews, and it's indictment saying they kept their old ways of avodah zarah, and that's why they're toast, and that's why they were tossed out. Or this is now referring back to the Kutim and saying that in spite of the fact that it said that they feared God, they still kept to their original ways, i.e., they still were worshipers of avodah zarah. Mem Aleph. Vayu hagoyim ha'ela yiraim et Hashem. So now maybe this gives a little bit of credence. We'll see. We're going to see one more slide on this chapter. That this is the last, this pasuk, mem, before this is the Kutim, but let's see. These nations who were transplanted to Israel, Yiraim et Hashem feared God, ve'et b'silehem hayu ovdim, but their idols they also worshipped. Gam b'nehem uvnei b'nehem, their children and their grandchildren, kasher asu avotam hem osim, just like their fathers did, they did. Ad hayom hazeh, till this very day, i.e. to the time that Yirmiyahu wrote this. What is this pasuk? So let's take one more slide on this chapter before we close it out. And that would be this one. Okay. Right here. It seems on the surface that this last part is dealing with the settlers of the land, these non-Jews. But as has been stated, it's possible that the whole mention of these mityashvim is really connected still to this very long indictment that started at the beginning of this chapter. This is one of the longer chapters we've done in Melachim Bet. It's 41 psukim, and we can see that if this section is also part of the indictment, we're talking approximately 27 psukim, more, maybe 28 or 30 psukim, are this indictment of the northern kingdom. First, it mentions why they went into Galut. And then after that, why their land, i.e. Israel, was given over to foreigners. And then it continues by the Navi describing their spiritual situation in foreign lands. Skip the bracket. It ends or completes the story of the description with the spiritual situation of the mityashvim, these transplants, who came in place of the 10 tribes. We talked a little bit about this last time, that there might have been a little twinge of hope for Am Yisrael, who are already now in Galut, and say, it seems like Hashem really wants that land to stay a certain way. They send somebody there to teach them and get things in order, but that's not what's going to end up playing out. That's not how it's going to be. Okay. This parak, for the most part, brings to a conclusion the exile of the northern kingdom. There's in the next chapter, in 18, which we're going to touch on tonight for a little bit, is going to mention a little bit more again, but now the scene, in quotes, is going to go back a bit in time, just a little bit, and it's going to shift to Malchut Yehuda, to the Judean kingdom, meaning Yerushalayim area, an area of Binyamin, our area. But we need to talk a little bit of background first. So, Ruchim Abayim Lolam Shel Chizkiyahu HaMelech. How many chapters does the Torah give us that have to do with creation? It's a simple question.
2.
1.5, 2. Correct. First 2 chapters, pretty much, right? And famously, that Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal talked about what he called Adam 1 and Adam 2, the 2 different creations, the 2 different descriptions. Very nice. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, look it up. It's fascinating. How many chapters do we have in the Torah, not Navi, in Torah, that are dedicated to the building and the execution of the plan of the Mishkan?
Oh, we have two whole parshiot, not just chapters.
We have 4 parshiot. That's correct. We have Truman
No, 2 for the
Tetzaveh,
planning, 2 for the
right?
execution.
Truman Tetzaveh and Vayakel Pekudei. That's correct.
Right.
Okay. We know that we have these chunks within Torah where we get to, you have this the Chet HaEgel, the Chet HaMeraglim, what's his name? Korach V'Adato. We have these sections, but we don't have all that many that span many chapters that are not details. What do I mean? In other words, you may have a few prakim. I didn't even count how many are between Vayakel and Pekudei, and then before that, Truman Tetzaveh. You have a few prakim, but it's just more detail between the what it's supposed to be and then how it's made. I don't want to chas v'shalom to minimize it, but I want to make a distinction between that and what we're about to do. If we take a look, and it's pretty amazing. Let me see if I have it here. I think I put it down here. Yeah, I'm gonna skip a slide and go to here. In Sefer Melachim Bet, when we start now Parak Yud Chet, there's a section from Yud Chet, Yud Tet, and Kaf. That's 3 chapters. The parallel story or narrative takes place in Sefer Yeshayahu. We will actually meet Yeshayahu in these prakim here in Sefer Melachim, and they span Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin, Lamed Chet, and Lamed Tet. And in Divrei Yamim Bet, Kaf Tet, Lamed, Lamed Aleph, Lamed Bet. 21 prakim altogether that deal with the Tkufa, or the time period of Chizkiyahu. So that has to tell you something that's relatively important about this time period. Now, does that mean that, oh, there's only basically 1.5 chapters about creation, so it's not that important? God forbid. We do not subscribe quantity to quality, nor do we subscribe quantity to importance. But it is important to note that one of the reasons that the Torah spends very little time on creation is because it's nistar. It's hidden. We can't, no matter how much you can learn and how many pages and how many commentaries you can read, you will never understand. I can't say all of Sefer Bereshit, but for sure not the beginning. You not understand it to the level Hashem wants us to understand it, because it's not meant to be. It's nistar, it's hidden. But nigleh, that which is revealed and that we have to learn more from, there's Hashem's going to spend a lot more time through himself or through the Nevi'im in what comes up. What I want to do is take a little survey of the upcoming few chapters. What is exactly going to happen? And I'll tell you why I want to do this. One of the downsides of learning once a week is that you get into an area and you start a path of a narrative, and it gets chopped up, and you sometimes lose the whole picture. You know, this past chapter, he's probably spent 5-6 classes on, but we saw the whole mahalach, right? There was the mention of the galut, the exile. There was the indictment. We talk about the people coming to the land. We talk about the indictment, nikudah. That's the section. But here there are going to be many things that are going to happen over the next multiple chapters. So I just want to give you like an overview of what's coming up with almost no detail. And I'm just going to follow through these steps. This section, this Chativa, deals with, there's an introduction to Divrei about Chizkiyahu. It's going to tell us about the major actions of Chizkiyahu, the destruction of the final nail in the coffin. So I told you, he's going to come back to it for a couple of psukim, of the northern kingdom of the Mamlechet Shomron, or also known as the Northern Kingdom. Then Sancheriv will rear his ugly head and will come to do battle now in Judea, in Yehuda. And Chizkiyahu will try, on the surface at least, to try to calm him down and to buy him off, and to say, look, maybe money will stop this upcoming destruction. Sancheriv changes his mind, and he sends more of his officers to Chizkiyahu. And then there will be a series of 2 speeches of what we could call in modern terms psychological warfare. Let me give you an example of psychological warfare from modern times, which some of you are very well familiar with. Beginning the 6-Day War, when Egypt is announcing that they're bombing Tel Aviv and there are thousands dead, and obviously the airplanes that were on the radar were the Israeli planes heading back after wiping out the Egyptian Air Force on the ground, Baruch Hashem. But there will be this speech given by a man named Rav Shakeh a couple of times, and Chizkiyahu will even tell Rav Shakeh to speak in Aramaic and not Hebrew, because he didn't want the people to understand what was being said. We'll come to that. So there's the request from the Sarim of Chizkiyahu that he should not speak in Yehudit, which is Hebrew. And then the response, there's the second speech from Rav Shakeh in front of the king and the Jewish people. Chizkiyahu will come to the Beit HaMikdash and will then engage Yeshayahu the Navi to go to bat for Am Yisrael and daven for them on behalf of what we also call nowadays the Sherita Pleita, the leftover, the people have been left behind, the refugees, but they're not really refugees. The ones who are in Yehuda area. That is the first prophecy of Yeshayahu. Now I'm going to take a pause here for 1 second. Another, I'm late. I'm sounds like I'm really going to bat against Jewish education, but I'm not. I promise you. It's just some of my pet peeves. There is not Sefer Melachim, and then comes Sefer Yeshayahu, and then it's going to be Chizkiyahu. I mean Yechezkel, and then there's the 12 prophets, and there's Micha, and there's Malachi, and they weren't like in a chronological succession that one came after the other. But Sefer Melachim was that Yeshayahu lived. We talked about this. Was the contemporary of 4 of the kings. So his nevuah was so important that there's a separate sefer with his nevuot, and there's multiple chapters about this particular time period. But some of the nevuot Yeshayahu says in this particular section here in Sefer Melachim. After that, that's his first nevuah. Yud Aleph, I'm over here. Sancheriv will send messengers second time to Chizkiyahu, and they'll have books, letters. We'll see that. There's the second time that there's a prayer of Chizkiyahu, the second nevuah of Yeshayahu, and then will be the obliteration of the Assyrian army by Yerushalayim and the murder of Sancheriv by the children, by his sons in Nineveh. This here, Yud Daled, this is part of the reason I'm mentioning all this tonight. We're going to hear about this man, Chizkiyahu Melech, who the Gemara says could have been Mashiach had he not missed one certain opportunity, which we'll talk about next week, or probably 3 or 4 weeks from now. But the zenith of this entire section is this Yud Daled. What happens when our enemies came against us and the tremendous nis that took place. Tedvav is Chizkiyahu gets sick and he's about to die. He prays to live. We'll see why would he pray to live. What was his purpose in living? Then he does get extra life given to him. He has a 4th prophecy. A certain sign is given to him, which we'll talk about. Then there's the man named Baladan ben Baladan, who comes against Chizkiyahu. And finally, we have the rebuke of Yeshayahu in his 5th prophecy to Chizkiyahu. And finally, the closing episode at the end of Parakaf of Chizkiyahu. For those of you, and I'm sure everyone here has been here, you go in the old city, you walk near the Cardo, and you're on the upper level, and you look down, you see all those columns. So you'll see near those columns what is known as the broad wall. That is Chizkiyahu's wall. We're going to talk about that eventually. I haven't told him yet, but there's somebody who I'm very close to, doesn't live here, lives in Yerushalayim. Some of you may know him. I'm going to see if I can get him as a guest to come on one time when we're talking about that section, because as well as you know the back of your hand, he knows every inch of, especially Yerushalayim, but a large part of Israel, but especially the historical connections and things that you're not going to get from me from that part of Sefer Melachim. So I still have to reach out to him. So in any case, we have this whole section coming to us now. We'll just take a look at the first few psukim, a little taste of where we're going. Let's take a look. We're getting a parak Yudchet, number 18, chapter pasuk Aleph. Vahi bishnat shalosh laHoshea ben Elah melech Yisrael. In the 3rd year of the reign of Hoshea ben Elah, who remember was the last king of the northern kingdom, in the 3rd year of his reign, Malach Chizkiyahu ben Achaz melech Yehuda. Chizkiyahu became king of Yehuda, and he was a much, much better person than his father Achaz. Bet ben 25 shana haya b'molcho. He was 25 when he became king. Ve'esrim b'tesha shana malach b'Yerushalayim. For 29 years he ruled in Yerushalayim. B'shem imo, and as always, when we see a king of Yehuda mentioned, we also find out his mother's lineage or his mother's name, and his mother's name was Avi bat Zechariah. Vayas, here's a shocker. We don't usually hear, unfortunately, this part of Sefer Melachim, but we finally hear it. Vayas hayashar b'nei Hashem. He did that which was straight in the eyes of God. Kechol asher asa David aviv. Finally, we have a king who did what David did. He was a wonderful individual, great man like David, his father, his forefather. What did he do? So it tells us, he removed the high places, the private altars. Shiber, I can't tell what it says here, it's messed up. And he destroyed all of the Shibar it is? Okay, good, thank you. The whatchamacallits, the
Asherah.
not the Asherah. Matzevot. I didn't get the Asherah. It's the next one.
Pillars.
Pillars.
Pillars. There's a better word. What?
Statues?
No, there's a better word. Why can't I think of the word? Okay, but you know what I'm saying. Fine.
Monument?
Monuments. Let's go with that. The Charatat Asherah, and he cut down all the Asherah trees. The Chitat Nechata Nechoshet Asher Asa Moshe. Whoa, this is something new. For centuries, Am Yisrael had something with them that we're only hearing about now for the first time since the end of one parasha in the Torah, but you're all going to tell me what it is. There was a plague that decimates, which is really the wrong use of word. Decimate means a tenth, but decimates has come to mean to destroys a lot. Decimates a lot of Am Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu takes a copper snake and has it standing up. And he says, whoever looked at the snake would survive and everyone else would die. And Rashi tells us over there famously, what is the snake memitu mechayeh? Does the snake give life or death? But it means whoever looked towards Hashem and believed in Hashem, he would live. That copper snake remained a fixture, literally and figuratively, among the Jewish people. Parenthetically, the symbol for medical whatever, for medicine, for doctors, for hospitals, is that snake. That's why you have that. It's wrapped around a pole. I'm not talking about a barber's pole. That's something else. It has to do with bloodletting. The red represent. You know, I'm talking about a barber's pole.
Yeah.
Not that old. It's outside a barbershop. The red and white is nothing to do with the United States. It's the red for bloodletting and the white with the rags and okay, whatever.
We used to see them in England. That's proof that it's nothing to do with the United States.
That's right. That's true. Yeah, good point. So this copper snake had remained among the Jewish people for centuries. And what did he do? What did Chizkiyahu do? He cut it up. He destroyed it. Ki ad hayamima hema, till that very day, we learned something very interesting, that somehow this copper snake took on a level of avodah zarah, and Bnei Yisrael was bringing incense in front of this copper snake. Vaikralo nechushtan. He called Chizkiyahu referred to the snake as the copper one. Why? It was a form of derision to make fun of it. It's just a piece of a load of copper. There is a not so subtle message in this pasuk that I think it's important to note. There can be some things that no matter how good your intentions might be, they can be misused. There was a sefer called a Sefer Refuah. It was a book that they're supposed to have had all the refuot to all the makot, all the cures to all the plagues, to all the illnesses. And it was buried. By whom? We'll see. But why was it buried? Well, if you had all the cures and everything to all the illnesses, you might not need Hashem anymore in your life to daven, potentially. Who knows? But it could be used to turn you away from God, rather than to recognize the magnificence of Hashem, but could use to be turn you away from it. Here, in a similar fashion, this Nechasha Nechoshet that was used to stop a plague became twisted, no pun intended, became twisted by Am Yisrael and used as avodah zarah. This is the very, very first time, to the best of my recollection, that this is mentioned since the narrative originally in the Torah. But why is it mentioned now all of a sudden? Because it's trying to tell us that in every other king that we've learned about so far, that was able to some degree, to follow the footsteps of David, to some degree get rid of these part of the Avodah Zarah. They never succeeded to getting rid of the Bamot. Always said, Raket Bamot, still Hayum Zabechimu Mekatri. They're still using the Bamot, those high places, the private altars. They were still bringing Korbanot privately, and they were still bringing it. But it tells us now that not only did Chizkiyahu get rid of what we've already known about, but even something that may have been, let's say, more of a private worship, even though it says, doesn't necessarily mean all of Am Yisrael. He's saying he really succeeded in eradicating what would seem to be at this point all vestiges of idolatry. Maybe. That's a big maybe. We'll have to wait and see on that. One more pasuk. He trusted completely in God. Nor were there any other kings before him like him, nor after him. Now, for those of you who have the list of all the Malchei Yehuda, and Aryeh, I think you might have that handy. Do you have it with you, by any chance? Good. Tell me what's the name of the last Melech of Yehuda? Chizkiyahu. Right. So what does it mean when the Navi tells us that after him there were no kings of Yehuda like him? We'll have to wait and see for that. Bezrat Hashem. I'll leave you with that teaser. Bezrat Hashem, next Sunday night we shall continue. We'll read a couple more psukim. Then we're going to get into a little bit more depth of this chunk or this section before we move on to the next part of the parak. Have a Shavua Tov. It should be a good week. I know that for some, the Seger is extremely difficult, depending what you do with your lives for work. For some, it's not the biggest deal, but no matter what you're doing or not doing, just as they say, Godspeed. Hashem should be with you in everything.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Erev Tov.